Hi, Katiana. I'm meteorologist Dave Baker. Happy Monday to you. Hopefully you had a great weekend. A lot of sunshine out there today with a few clouds mixed in, and it's a pretty day, although it's still feeling kind of summer-like as we round out the month of September and start October as we go into Tuesday. We don't have anything to talk about locally right now. We've got a tropical wave that we're still watching down in the Caribbean, but all of the action is out in the Atlantic, and we have a new tropical storm, which is Kirk, and we'll get to that in just a little bit. I got the coordinates there on the left-hand side of your screen. Isaac and Joyce are still out there, but Kirk is the one that we're going to kind of focus on a little bit more today, and then farther down the road we might be talking about something a little closer to home. So let's go ahead and get started. A beautiful day here in Lafayette, 87, the latest check of the temperature, feeling more like 89, and I think those heat index values are going to push into the mid-90s later this afternoon with actual highs in the lower 90s. Those dew points are starting to creep up, and I think they're going to get back in the 70s as we head into tomorrow, so it will be feeling a lot more summer-like. Winds are light out of the north at 3 miles per hour and the pressure at 2997. But you can see the skies there. Clear skies looking off to the east there in Breaux Bridge. Then as you're looking out there over, or rather toward the west, and as you're looking over there on Louisiana Avenue, which is looking a little bit more to the east, you see some cloud cover out there, but it is a mostly sunny sky today, and I don't think we're going to see any rain this time around, and at least the next couple of days are going to be relatively dry. So as we look at the big picture here on the Gulf of Mexico satellite imagery, we've got a little bit of a boundary that's been creating some showers there right along the coast and then pushing southward over into the central part of the Gulf. And then of course you can see that moisture that's starting to build in the western part of the Caribbean, and that's the area that we're going to kind of focus on here in just a little bit. And as far as our wave heights and winds, for those who are boating or working out in the Gulf of Mexico, you've got a relatively pleasant day there. Very light winds are going to be variable, about 5 to 10 knots, and the seas only running about 1 to 2 feet. So locally across the U.S., now we still have what's left of Helene. This is what's kind of swirling around here over the eastern half of the country, but it's no longer a tropical system. It's kind of an upper low and a bit of a surface feature still left over, but it's bringing some drizzle and some showers there along the east coast. And then you might notice up here, if you look up here toward the Canadian border, and if you're looking out here kind of behind the tidal back here in the Pacific Northwest, you can see these storm systems kind of rolling here along the Canadian border. So as we start to get into October, those begin to amplify a little bit more. And a lot of times when you have tropical systems that are trying to form in the western Caribbean near the Yucatan, a lot of times those troughs, as they dig a little bit farther to the south, are able to yank on these and pull them off to our east. Now, we have had tropical systems affect Louisiana during the month of October. Many of those in recent memory too, Zeta and Delta back in 2020. Of course, we had the bigger one back in, back in 2002, we had Hurricane Lily that came in, and that anniversary later on this week too. But most of our tropical systems do tend to turn a little bit more toward the northeast. So right now we don't know if anything's going to develop in the first place down to the south, but right now it appears that most of the action or the moisture or maybe even the lowering pressures might stay a little bit farther to the east. And again, there's that little bit of a boundary that's kind of out here in the Gulf waters, so a few of you might be seeing a little more cloud cover and perhaps a few isolated sprinkles out there, but that's really not going to amount to a whole lot out there in the Gulf of Mexico. So let's get out into the main part of the Atlantic. We've got three different things we're watching. One was Hurricane Isaac, and the National Hurricane Center has now put its last advisory out. It's actually off the screen here up to the top, and then right in here is Joyce, and right in here is our newly formed Tropical Storm Kirk. Joyce, meanwhile, is just a tropical depression, and it's really struggling. As you look at the satellite imagery there, you see the low-level spin, which shows you that it's still a tropical system, but you can see how how the thunderstorms are being blown off toward the northeast. They've got some pretty decent wind shear that's tackling this right now, so we're not expecting Joyce to get a whole lot stronger, and it is expected to stay a tropical depression out in the Atlantic Ocean and won't bother anyone. Our newest system is Tropical Storm Kirk. It has strengthened with winds up to 50 miles per hour, and the pressure's dropped to 1,001 millibars. Now, this one has a little bit better of a chance of strengthening. In fact, the National Hurricane Center's official forecast brings it to a major hurricane, but at this point, it appears it is going to stay out over the Atlantic Ocean, at least for the next several days. But right now, looking at some of the extended models, I think this is going to get absorbed by a front and most likely will probably continue to turn more toward the north and then eventually back out to sea a little bit later on, going into the latter part of the week and the weekend. So even though we've got two systems out there and maybe another one that wants to try to develop off the African coast, at this point, nothing that's out there appears to be threatening the U.S., the Caribbean, nor the Gulf of Mexico. So let's get into the Caribbean satellite. And this is kind of where we've been focusing, where the National Hurricane Center thinks there might be a chance for some development maybe out here in the western part of the Caribbean Sea. You do see that spin there. That's an upper level system that's moving off toward the west, and then you got more of a tropical wave that's right in here. So the two of those are rolling in tandem off toward the west, and upper lows really don't work well with tropical waves. They tend to tear them apart. So with that upper trough in place, we're not really expecting a whole lot of development there over the western part of the Caribbean, but you can see that there's a lot of moisture that is starting to gather along with that tropical wave. And at the same time, if you've watched Acadiana weather today and you recognize what happened with Hurricane Helene, what we had was a tropical wave, and then what we have is what's called the Central American Gyre, which is kind of a broad low pressure area that kind of straddles the Atlantic, the Caribbean, or rather the Caribbean, the Pacific, and the southern part of the Gulf of Mexico. And what you do is you get low pressure areas that kind of rotate around that larger, broad, low pressure area. And it's a pretty significant feature during the early part of the hurricane season, during the month of June, which is why this area and this area are your two bigger hot spots during the early part of the hurricane season. And then as you start to get into August and September, that kind of weakens somewhat, and it's not as much of an influence. But rolling back into October and November, this kind of comes back once again, and that is going to be the focal point for the possibility of some development over the western part of the Caribbean Sea. So right now, that area is still shaded in orange, but the National Hurricane Center has kind of lowered the possibility of development down to 40%. It has been running about 50% over the last couple of days. So it's not really a big change there, but still a medium chance for development. And if anything does develop, it's going to be very slow to do this. So we're not expecting a hurricane or a tropical system to rush its way toward the northern Gulf Coast this week. If anything develops and makes it into the northern part of the Gulf of Mexico, it's probably not going to be until this upcoming weekend, or perhaps even into the early part of next week. And there's a lot of variation when it comes to the computer models. So right now, we're just kind of looking at something that might try to develop, and it's probably going to be weak and disorganized. But that's based on the models and everything that we're looking at right now. Of course, the water temperatures are quite warm. Helene going through the western Caribbean and the eastern Gulf, churning up a little bit of cooler water, but not a lot. So everything in the Gulf and the western part of the Caribbean still warm enough for supporting tropical types of systems. And then that tropical cyclone heat potential, or that 80-degree water goes super deep, is all still there as well. So we're not seeing a whole lot of changes. So that's why we tend to get a little bit concerned whenever we're seeing tropical systems trying to fester there in the western part of the Caribbean and the southern Gulf. Not just because it's in our neighborhood, but because this is the area that probably has the most juice for a tropical system to work with, that premium fuel. And as we saw with Hurricane Helene last week, it went basically from a tropical storm to a Category 4 hurricane in a matter of about 48 hours. So we had that rapid intensification happen. I don't see that in the models right now. Part of the reason is there's a considerable amount of shear that's happening right now across this area. The tropical wave is kind of right in here, so it's on the western edge of of that upper level low that's right there. And then we still have a bit of troughiness kind of left over from Hurricane Helene off to our northwest. So we've got some fairly strong wind shear here along the northern Gulf Coast. But this particular area here is going to be seeing weak to moderate wind shear over the next several days. Not super conducive for tropical development, but we've seen things develop in harsher environments than this. So it is something that we will continue to watch. So let's just go ahead and go through some of the computer models, and we're going to stick with the global models today, because of the development of this could possibly be very, very slow. And you can still see that the GFS has kind of got a broad low pressure area that tries to develop there over the northwestern Caribbean, and then maybe kind of sliding across into the Bay of Campeche. But I will note that there's like 3 different kind of ripples that are there that are showing up in the model. So I don't think the GFS really has a very good handle on what could be developing out there. As you see, there's little ripples of energy that kind of develop as you get toward the latter part of the forecast. And this is going out 10 days. So this is going out to what? Tuesday of next week, so that would be October the 8th, I believe, is how far that, October the 9th. So it goes out till Wednesday of next week. And you can see that it is showing a broad low pressure area out there, but it just doesn't have anything real conclusive. The same thing with the Euro model. You see a lot of moisture developing in that western Caribbean, southern part of the Gulf of Mexico here. But again, there's nothing real concrete there. You kind of see a little bit of a low develop, and then it kind of strengthens and pushes off toward the east, and then gets caught up by a trough. Remember, we talked about those troughs that are moving along the Canadian border. As we progress into October, they get stronger, they get deeper, and they're able to yank on some of these and pull them off toward the northeast. So as we let this roll again going into next week, this is like Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday of next week. So we're talking about 7 to 8 days away. The Euro predicting maybe a very weak tropical storm trying to work its way over toward Florida. Canadian model a little more robust on development in this particular area, but then it gets caught up and zips along pretty quickly, actually reaching the southwest Florida coast, according to this particular model, by the end of the weekend, Sunday into Monday of next week. But you can see it's a fairly decent low pressure area. That might be a tropical storm, could possibly get a name. But just like the other 2 models, there's nothing super conclusive. And when you've got the GFS trying to do something over here, and the Euro trying to do something over here, and then the Canadian over here, you just don't have a lot of agreement other than there might be something trying to develop over the Gulf of Mexico. And the same thing goes with the icon. Now, remember, the icon doesn't go out as far. The GFS goes out 16 days, but I only showed you 10. Euro and Canadian also go out 10 days, and the icon model only goes out 7. So you can see the icon is also developing something and kind of shoving it off toward the northeast. It develops over the western Caribbean, kind of drifts over the Yucatan, festers a little bit there over the southern part of the Bay of Campeche, and then it's predicting a trough, a cold front type of system pulling in and pushing that off toward the northeast. Unfortunately, again, a lot of the models are kind of favoring the eastern part of the Gulf of Mexico, which would be really bad considering the folks with Hurricane Helene are still dealing with the aftermath. There's still millions on the East Coast from Florida all the way to the Carolinas that are without power. And over 100 people have now lost their lives, according to the last report with Hurricane Helene. And some of the damage estimates now are really going through the roof with that. So having something else come along would not be a good thing for our friends that live off toward the east. So as of now, just looking at the different 4 models, there might be something developing there, but at this point, it doesn't look to be anything too significant or strong. And at this point, most of the models, and as you get into October, just looking at climate, most of these will favor a system moving into the eastern part of the Gulf of Mexico rather than the western. So right now, there is nothing to worry about. It's still hard to tell what's going to develop, if anything, how strong it will be, and then of course the direction of movement. And then the timing is way off too. You got some that are holding this until Tuesday, Wednesday next week, and you got another model that's bringing it on shore Sunday night of Southwest Florida. So not a lot of agreement, and that's why the forecast is really unclear with this. Now, when Helene was developing in the same area, there were some other players around that were really solid. So we had a really good handle on that it was going to be moving toward the northeastern part of the Gulf of Mexico. That was with Helene, and we knew that for several days ahead of time. And we were pretty certain it was going to be fairly strong because of the different elements with the wind shear and the high tropical cyclone heat potential. This one has a lot more variables out there. So this one's going to be a little bit more difficult to forecast over the next couple of days. So it's best that you just kind of check in once a day. But as I said, there's really nothing to worry about, at least at this point. Remember how I told you how that Central American gyre tends to develop more systems in the Bay of Campeche in the western part of the Caribbean? Well, as you look when we turn the page to October, you can see this is where most of the tracks of named storms have been during the month of October. And it does seem to concentrate a little bit more close to that Central American gyre. And even though we are turning the page into October, October is still a relatively busy month, although you do see the activity kind of dropping off. But usually here in Louisiana, we can kind of let it go as we get past maybe October 20th, 25th, somewhere in that range, because we've never had a hurricane hit Louisiana in November. We've had some tropical storms come pretty close. But I did want to point out that we're starting to play catch up now when it comes to a hurricane season. So we now are on storm number 11, named storm. Remember, potential tropical cyclone 8 never got a name. So that's why Kirk was tropical depression number 12, even though we only have 11 names, because one of them did not get a name. But we should be on number 11 by about October the 2nd. So we are really in the ballpark now compared to a normal season. And as far as hurricanes, we're ahead of schedule now. We've had 6. And we're probably going to end up with 7 here with Kirk, most likely. So we're ahead of schedule there. And then on major hurricanes, we've had 2. So we're a little behind schedule as far as September the 19th because Helene became a major hurricane after that date. But October 28th is when we usually have our 3rd one. Compared to a normal season there. So I think we're going to have a major hurricane probably in the next couple of days when it comes to Kirk. But as far as reaching number 14 for a normal season, that is definitely within reach now, as it appears that October wants to pretend more like what September should have been, and September really was not as busy as what it should have been, and August, because of the high wind shear and a lot of the Saharan dust and a big dome of high pressure over Central America, we really just didn't have a whole lot. And there still are indications that La Niña is going to start to kick in, but when the early forecasts came out, we thought La Niña would have really kicked in by now, and we're still in a neutral zone at this point, and we might start to slide into La Niña toward the very end of the hurricane season. But to tell you the truth, I think we're going to be focusing more on what La Niña is going to bring for our winters. And if you're interested, La Niña usually brings a warmer winter and also a drier winter to the Gulf Coast. So maybe we'll get a little less rain, but I know there's a lot of folks, as summer gets toward the end here, you'd like to see some decent cold temperatures starting to come in. But typically with La Niña, you get kind of an above average season on temperature and a little bit low average when it comes to your rainfall. So we'll watch and see how strong this La Niña is when it starts to kick in over the next several months. But at least for that, that's going to be changing our winter as a warmer and probably a drier season. So check in with me as you go through time. Like this video, subscribe to my channel, and also turn on those notifications. And if there are any major updates with Kirk, I'll put those on those social media pages there on Facebook and X. And of course, if you've got those notifications on, you will get the notice when Let's Talk Tropics starts at noon every weekday, and when Acadiana Weather Today airs at 7:30 right here on Acadiana Weather Today. I hope you all have a great day. I'm meteorologist Dave Baker, and I will see you on Tuesday. See you then.